What's up, y'all? We are back with another edition of DNVR Rams Live. As always, I'm your host, Justin Michael. Hope everybody's enjoying their week so far. It's been not too hot, kind of rainy, nice for the grass. You gotta love that. We've got a lot of random stuff to dive into this morning. We're definitely in the heart of the off season, but I figured we could start looking ahead and really start to set the scene for the 2025 season, the last year of the Mountain West as we know it. Still feels really weird. I know there's still a lot to be sorted out here in terms of the future of the Pac-12 and what that media deal is going to look like and what the media deal is going to look like for the Mountain West as well moving forward. We'll talk about all that, I'm sure, in pretty great detail over the next month or so as that info comes out. But I figured we could kind of take a way too early look at some of these teams, talk about, why I feel good about a couple of teams, why I think certain teams are maybe undervalued versus overvalued, all that fun stuff. Give some sleeper picks. We'll also do a power ranking for Mountain West football uniforms. I saw somebody debating about it online in terms of who has like the best jersey versus the best helmet, and I kind of tried to weigh all of that into the equation. I gave every team a uniqueness score, a jersey score, a helmet score, tried to kind of average it out and figure out who has what I believe are the best uniforms in the Mountain West. So that'll be kind of a fun topic. At the end, we'll get into some summer to-do list stuff in Northern Colorado, some stuff I'm looking forward to doing. I'm always looking for suggestions on things to explore in this great state. Before I forget, I do want to shout out our DNVR Die Hard sale, which is active at the moment. If you're not a Die Hard, this intro offer allows you to become one for $36 for the first year. Not only are you going to get access to all of our premium content, but you get a free t-shirt of your choice. That can be a CSU shirt if you want it to be. Doesn't have to be, though. We've got a lot of awesome Avs and Nuggets gear. Broncos season's right around the corner. I was talking about it with my awesome producer Kale pregame, but if you're subject to watch Rockies baseball, if you want to put yourself through that type of punishment, we do actually have some pretty sweet Rockies merch that you can rock. Obviously, Coors Field is always a vibe, kind of regardless of the product, although it's admittedly becoming a little bit tougher for me to embrace. I am not one of those guys that's going to sit here and be like, everybody boycott, nobody go to the games, because one, it's a great setting. Going to a baseball game inherently is just awesome. But two, I just don't think it really changes anything. Like, they're not going to sell. So what does it matter? Anyways, got a little sidetracked there. Let's get into some of the stuff we have planned for today. I wanted to give just a couple of thoughts on the recent comments from SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey, who unsurprisingly is throwing a fit because Alabama and South Carolina got left out of the college football playoff. He had a bunch of passive aggressive comments about, it's clear that losing becomes in many ways more important than beating the University of Georgia, which two of our teams that were left out did. He said in reference to the belief that the strength of schedule was not taken into consideration. I, as an Alabama supporter, even think he's out of his mind. The fact that it was even a conversation was due to the strength of the schedule. It was doing a lot of heavy lifting. That win over Georgia that Bama had was certainly as impressive as anybody's in the country in terms of the regular season. But they followed that up by losing like 3 of their last 6 games, including to Vanderbilt and Oklahoma, who is just awful. Like, you have no excuses here. You just don't have a leg to stand on. And it just frustrates me because that inevitably, like, this is going to lead to the SEC and the Big Ten trying to pull even further away. In the coming years, we've already seen reports about the SEC questioning whether they should even be in the NCAA at all. And admittedly, I think the NCAA is fairly flawed, and I don't really think they have much power as an organization right now. But just the fact that they want to continue to rip up the fabric of college sports and change everything we know about it, all because they feel that they're not getting what is owed to them. Like, how big of the pie do you need? Like, how big of the piece is enough if you're the SEC, if you're the Big Ten? We've got the 12-team format right now. They already made sure that a G5 will never get a bye again because Boise was able to pull that off last year, and we knew that was going to happen. But they're already talking about when it expands to 16 teams, which feels inevitable down the line, that like the SEC and the Big Ten should get 4 automatic qualifiers apiece and have potentially even multiple rounds of buys. And it's just become ridiculous. And it drives me crazy that the one time that something doesn't work out in favor of the SEC in terms of the college football playoff, you have the commissioner coming up here trying to grandstand. And it makes me roll my eyes. I understand that his job is to advocate for his league, and he's very good at it. He's great at it, in fact. But I just can't roll my eyes enough when the SEC is whining about strength of schedule being a factor and all this, when we're 2 years removed from Alabama getting in over an undefeated Florida State. Like, the arguments that Sankey has been making this week just don't have a lot of weight to them. And I don't know, like, it feels like down the line, the SEC and Big Ten are going to break off and do their own thing anyways. And who knows what that's going to look like for the rest of college football. I've advocated pretty consistently now that if you're the ACC and the Big 12, you should be trying to look out what's best for everyone and stop trying to pretend that you are in the same conversation as those other 2 leagues. Because I'm telling you, if you're the Big 12 without Texas, without OU, how you're viewed by those other leagues, it's a lot like the Pac-12. It's a lot like, the American. You're a whole lot closer to our side of the conversation than you are to hanging with the big boys. And I do worry that the fact that every single one of these big decisions and all these changes in college football are made with not what's in the best interest of college football as a whole, but what can best help my school, what's best for me, what's best for my league. It's putting the sport in a really weird spot. Like, you can't argue from the SEC if you're the Big Ten. I think you understand the logic behind them adding those other teams. You're just trying to create these super conferences. I get all that. I also think you're ripping up a ton of history. You're adding all kinds of unnecessary travel. You're, abandoning rivalries and traditions and all that. But like, I understand if you're the Big Ten and you have the opportunity to add Oregon and USC, if you're the SEC and you have a chance to add Texas and Oklahoma, you're going to do it. I get all of that. I just think it sucks that there's nobody that looks out after the interest of the sport as the whole, looks out over the interest of the sport as a whole, and not just what's best for me. Like, I think having some type of commissioner, a college football czar, or whatever you want to call it, would be really beneficial. And I think there's a million hoops to achieving that. Like, I don't think that the SEC or the Big Ten would willingly give up any type of control. If you're them, why do you want another entity involved that can potentially overrule you when you basically have total control at the moment? But I do think we're in dangerous territories. And I just think that the more we ignore what college football fans love about the sport in the first place, and the more that we abandon the traditions and we rip up the roots and we just make the sport unrecognizable, I do think there are consequences from that. And, I see some of these national college football writers and podcasters who all stump for the bigger leagues, and frankly, they don't give a shit about what's happening in the Mountain West or the Pac-12 anyways. But they'll snarkily dismiss any of the critiques that I brought up, and they'll say things like, well, do Saturdays still feel the same, you know? And it's like, kind of, to an extent. I get what you're going for when you say something like that. Yes, college football is still special. There's still nothing like it. Being in the stadium, being around, your fellow alumni, all of that. But I think you'd be oblivious to say that it doesn't feel different, especially for the smaller schools and the challenges of roster continuity. And I mean, it just makes it so tough to maintain any type of success when you know that, if you have all conference players, they're going to be getting offered, six figures plus to transfer. And it's just, I'll always love college football. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that. Like, I'm not trying to be too over dramatic or anything here, but I do think there's some real negative consequences of every league looking out for their own interests and not what is good for the overall growth of the game, or for, keeping the entire country invested in college football. And at some point, like, if you just abandon everything that all these other schools know, you don't give them any access or opportunity to, compete at the highest levels. I'm sure there's going to be more restricted access to the playoff at one point. Do you look around and just say, like, is this worth my time as a fan? And I think there are people that are already there. It'll take a lot for me to fully, stop loving college football and not be in it, because I'm just a sicko. I'm absolutely obsessed with it. It's my life. But I can't help but think, what used to be and how good we had it, and how we have complicated something that was pretty special, and just made it a big old mess. And I think there are a lot of benefits that have come from the college football playoff, but I think some of the consequences that have come from it, just in terms of how it's really devalued bowl season, how it's, led to so many of these realignment moves, there have been some negatives to come out of it, but I guess that's life. Anyways, I know I'm up on my soapbox here, so we can move on. We can get into the main focus of the show. We can talk Mountain West Championship betting odds. We'll get into Mountain West uniform power ranking a little bit later on in the show. I'll give some thoughts on, some fun things to do in Northern Colorado this summer. If you've got any suggestions, throw them our way in the Toyota chat. Any questions, comments, etc., I will get to as many of them as I can. If I don't get to them right away, I'll come back around at the end of the show. Shout out to our guy Taylor, rocking with us every day. Certainly appreciate you, buddy. Shout out to our friend Mark Ryan in the Toyota chat as well, who says, looking out for anyone other than yourself is un-American, and sadly getting more un-American daily. I think there's some validity to what you're saying there, Mark. It's certainly par for the course these days, and nothing about it is surprising, but I don't know. It bums me out to see. Larry says, my suggestion is to go get on the other podcast talking about the Buffaloes. I'd rather cut my tongue off, my guy. I'd rather watch paint dry, go do a bunch of terrible chores, you name it. They've got plenty of propaganda to push on their own over there without my input, and I'm sure nobody wants to hear it anyways. Yeah. All right, we're going to get into all that other stuff. Let's take a quick break. Let's shout out a couple of our awesome partners. Keep it rolling. Just like your favorite team needs a home court, home ice, home field advantage, your home needs a home floor advantage, and Empire Today can help you get it. Empire is knowledgeable people, and they don't try to overwhelm you with aisles and aisles of choices. Empire lives and breathes flooring. They bring the showroom right to you, plus Empire Today. They deliver such a smooth process. They're not trying to overwhelm you with 8 million choices and substitutes. You get clear, upfront dialogue, plus all-inclusive pricing. You can schedule installation as soon as the next day. I mean, they really are great to work with. Schedule a free in-home estimate today, because some things are just better at home. DNVR listeners can get a $350 discount when using the promo code DNVR. You heard that right, a $350 discount with the code DNVR. Restrictions do apply. Visit Empire Today/DNVR for details. I also want to talk to you about Lucy Nicotine, 100% pure nicotine, always tobacco-free. Lucy Breakers are nicotine pouches with a little extra surprise. I'm a big proponent of the pouches. Sometimes They can get a little bit papery, though. It kind of tastes like you're chewing on a straw wrapper. What's great about the Lucy Breakers is with the extra flavor capsule that they have, it just releases some extra hydration. And instead of chewing on a wrapper or like some tasteless gum, that nasty feeling in your mouth, it just keeps it so much smoother. I love that they've got a 4 milligram option. Sometimes 3 is not quite hitting right. Sometimes 6 is a little overwhelming. I love that sweet spot of 4. Mango's my personal favorite, but you can't go wrong. Cinnamon, mint, you name it, they've got it. Level up your nicotine routine with Lucy. Go to lucy.co/DNVR. Use promo code DNVR to get 20% off your first order. Lucy has a 30-day refund policy if you change your mind. Again, that's lucy.co. Use that code DNVR to get 20% off. Here comes the fine print. Lucy products are only for adults of legal age, and every order is age verified. Warning, this product contains nicotine, and nicotine is an addictive chemical. All right. I was just making some jokes before the ad break. Shout out to everybody in the Toyota chat. We're just having fun. A little bit of rivalry banter back and forth. It's what it's all about. And obviously, I've got a lot of love for the Buffs guys. They have a great show. They do a great job covering the CU side of things. That's just not my cup of tea, mate. All right, let's get into the Mountain West Championship betting odds here. Talk about maybe some of the more surprising figures, some of the unsurprising stuff. Boise State, the favorite. They've won back-to-back Mountain West championships. Not surprising at all. I obviously some reason to doubt Boise State a little bit, just given that they're no longer going to be able to lean on the workhorse that is Ashton Jeanty, one of the best players to have ever been in this conference. I mean, he is the sole reason that Boise State was in the college football playoff last year. I argued throughout the year that the gap between Boise and the rest of the league wasn't that significant. Just nobody had an Ashton Jeanty, and it's why I still feel like he had a really strong case to win the Heisman. I'm not trying to put down Travis Hunter or anything like that. He is one of the most impressive football players I've ever seen, certainly one of the most unique, and was well deserving. I wouldn't argue against him. I wouldn't put him down to try and prop up GNT, because I thought both those guys had awesome cases, but it's tough to expect the exact same type of offensive success given that, your quarterback is a little bit limited in terms of arm talent. They're still going to have a great run game. I mean, Dylan Riley, their backup, is as solid as anybody else's running back in the league anyways. And on top of that, they went out and added Malik Sherrod in the transfer portal from Fresno State, who's a stud. It was a tough offseason for Fresno State. We'll get into them a little bit down the line here, but it would very much surprise me if Fresno was in the mix this year. I guess we'll just say that. It's been a nice stretch for them, but they lost so many of their top guys, and obviously the coaching turnover. It's just been kind of a weird situation for them. But Boise State, you got Maddox Madsen back. You don't have Ahmad Hassanian on the defensive side. They lost a couple of guys to the portal, but nothing major. I still would bet on them to win the league. I mean, for one thing, it's just a safe bet at this point. History says if you bet on Boise more times than not, that's going to pay off for you. Minus 125 odds, though, so it's not as if they're projected to run away with the league, and I think that's fair. They should be considered the front runner, given their history, given the fact that they're still going to have a great run game. They do have a returning quarterback. You've got your head coach coming back, all that stuff. But I do think there's reason to believe that Boise could be a little bit more human in the post-GNT world. I still think they're going to be solid, but, what does your passing game look like? How explosive are you offensively? The thing about GNT is the stats were absurd, but like his ability to just turn any touch into a 50-yard touchdown, that's pretty unique. And you're going to be expecting a lot of those guys if you think they're going to be anything close to him. UNLV is the second favorite, I guess, if you will. They're next in line at plus 450, coming off of an 11-3 season. UNLV lost as much production as anybody in the country, so there's a lot of question marks about whether you're able to sustain this. Obviously, Barry Odom is no longer in the mix either. Took the head coaching job at Purdue, which was unsurprising, a bit of a bummer. It would have been cool to see him stick around for another year and see if they could follow it up. I thought UNLV had a nice offseason, all things considered. It's never an easy spot when you get poached by a Power 4 program. You lose guys to the portal. You're losing commits. on top of losing guys to graduation like Ricky White, who landed in Seattle alongside Torrey Horton. I'm a little bit skeptical of UNLV being able to sustain what they were last year, just given the turnover. And when you look at the history of the program, I mean, it's the polar opposite of, say, Boise State, who we just talked about. But I think they're going to be competitive. They brought in a lot of athletes, but it's just a lot of pieces that you're trying to get to come together very quickly. And I think they did about as well as they could, but it wouldn't surprise me if they're good, not great. Like maybe you take a small step back. I think they'll end the season a lot stronger than they'll begin it. I will say they play a much easier non-conference schedule this year than they did a year ago. That was part of what impressed me so much about what they did last year was, they beat a couple of Big 12 teams. They're not going to be in that spot this year. But not surprising that they're, right behind Boise State, given that they made the championship game. They've got a lot of hype right now with Dan Mullen. They're probably the sexy pick to win the league if you weren't going to go with just the front runner. These next couple are a little surprising to me. San Jose State at plus 750 and Fresno State at plus 800. I do think there's reason to believe San Jose State quietly could be one of the more dangerous teams in the league next year. You get Walker Eget back at quarterback. They've added some guys, through the portal. And I was impressed by what Ken Niumatalolo did in his first year as head coach after coming over from Navy. You just kind of wondered what that was going to look like after, running the triple option all those years. I will say, they lost 5 of their 6 all-conference players from this past year. A couple of those guys through the portal, 3 of them through graduation, but they did bring in Leland Smith from Purdue at wide receiver, who's pretty intriguing, and they don't have to play Boise State or UNLV in their schedule, which should be a big advantage for them. And my guess is that's why they're considered one of the top 3 favorites, despite on paper maybe not being the most logical pick. Like I think they're a bowl team for sure. Mountain West Championship feels a little steep for me. I don't know if I love the value there at plus 750. Like to me, you can get CSU at plus 1500, and with a third-year starting quarterback, like I think their cases would be relatively similar, but CSU's got a little bit more continuity. Maybe a little bit less of a favorable schedule, I guess, in terms of having to play those other top teams, though. Fresno being plus 800 right now, I just don't understand. You're coming off of a 6-7 year. You lose Mikey Keene to Michigan. Jalen Moss, their great receiver, went to Arizona State. Malik Sherrod, who we already talked about, their running back, he's now gone as well, playing at Boise. So not only do you not have him, he's playing for a conference rival. I liked Matt Entz as a hire. I think he makes sense in Fresno. Get somebody who can build a program, who's going to lay a solid foundation in terms of local recruiting roots. Like I think he'll really try and lean on the Valley. It's always been incredible to me how much talent gets out of Fresno at times, even with them not even being interested. Cough, cough, Torrey Horton. How do you not offer that guy if you're Fresno? Like it just baffles me. I was a little bit bummed my guy Tim Skipper didn't get the job, so maybe there's some personal bias factoring in there. I can't say I'm exactly rooting for Fresno State on top of they killed CSU's hopes of, going to the Mountain West Championship game last year. But all biases aside, I just don't see it. I don't see it's a first-year head coach. They have so much roster turnover. They did sign the Sacramento State quarterback, and I'm drawing a blank on his name. Let's see if I can find it here in my notes. And I thought he's a nice addition, in that spot. They could have done a lot worse than they did, but not crazy on Fresno going into this season. And I'm very curious what that offense looks like, given that, you don't have Keene, you don't have Sherrod, you don't have Jalen Moss anymore. That's a lot of significant production to try and replace with the first year staff. And they just, I don't see it. I don't know why CSU would be plus 1,500 and Fresno State would be only plus 800 odds, like basically getting twice as much value if you're betting on CSU. And I think CSU's path, unless you're looking at the schedule, which is admittedly a little bit tricky, I just think their case as a contender is a lot more logical. given that they do have a third year, starting quarterback, you're coming off of an 8-win season. CSU was stronger, although obviously you fizzled out in the bowl game, but they were much stronger in the second half of the year than they were in the first year. If you were skeptical, you could point out that while that was traditionally kind of how we looked for teams that were maybe on the rise, going into a new season, how did they end the past year? A lot like, how CSU was stronger in the end of the McElwain's first season in 2012, had a terrible start, and then at one point lost like 8-9 games in a row, but they ended strong. And then 2013, you kind of continue that ascension, and then they obviously end the 2013 season really strong, and go into 2014 and have a 10-win campaign. And all of this, the tough part now is that you just don't have the same type of roster continuity that you would have back then. And guys like Boom Jock who went to Cal, and Chase Wilson, West Virginia, like you lost a lot of the significant pieces that allowed you to have the 8-win season in the first place. But I've said it a couple of times now. I actually think CSU has had a really strong offseason, and having seen some of the guys in spring that they brought in, particularly on the defensive side, I think that they have maybe added more than they lost, which was definitely not how I was, feeling going into the spring. So I'm cautiously optimistic about the state of the roster, despite the fact that you lose about half your production between offense and defense. I believe that Braden Fowler-Nicolosi is in line to have his best season. I think everything around him is in a good spot. You don't have the star power of a Torrey Horton at wide receiver, but you've got a way deeper tight end room. I mean, I think the tight end room is going to be one of the biggest strengths for this team. I'm really excited about Rocky Beers, but I think Jackson Warren's going to be a stud. Even Carlos Anaya, who they brought in from the FCS ranks, I think he's got a chance to be a big playmaker. They've got a lot of size and they've got a lot of speed there. And when you factor that in with what should be a really deep backfield, top 3 in the league, I would assume. I think the 1-2 punch of Marshall and Dupree should be about on par with anything else that's out there. Maybe Boise, I'd give a slight edge to just because of their experience. But I love the direction of the offense. And I think everything around Braden should be good. And I think it'll, in some ways, be a benefit to not be so solely dependent on an offensive game plan that's dictated around getting the ball to Torrey all game long, and then not really having a great plan B other than, all right, I guess we're going to lean ground and pound and just, feed Avery Morrow over and over again. Obviously, you can't lean on him anymore either. But I think Braden's matured a lot these last couple of years. I think the arm talent's all there. I think he's in line. Everything on paper is there for him to have a great season. Now, we'd like to see the passing numbers be a little bit closer to, a couple of years ago, but he also has to be put in that opportunity, which he really wasn't last year with the way that things were called. And I understood the logic of it. They didn't trust the defense to get stops consistently. They were trying to limit turnovers, especially given the inexperience they had at the receiver position, which has really been a pretty significant factor in 2 of the 3 years that Norvell has been in Fort Collins now, is just not having enough experience at wide receiver, and injuries and a bunch of things that played into that, transfers. But I'm cautiously optimistic about BFN going into the year. If you're a skeptic, you would probably say he is who he is at this point. He's got the arm talent, but then some of the struggles like the turnovers came back into play in the bowl game. I think some of that is lacking context. And while I would certainly say he needs to play better than he did in that game, I just think the state of the offense was tough and not doing him any favors, and losing Goody in person right before the game was brutal, because I did think they had some momentum going in the passing offense. Now all of a sudden you're in a spot where you're trying to rely on a true freshman and some other underclassmen that just weren't playing earlier in the season for a reason. I'm not going to name names or anything like that. Like, there were some silver linings to come out of it, like the rise of Tommy Maher, and I think he's going to be a huge factor in the offense this year. But it was tough in terms of, expecting much from that group in the bowl game, just given all the circumstances. We're going to keep this going. We'll talk about the rest of the league. I'll give a couple more thoughts on CSU as a whole. Why at plus 1,500, I think there's some value there, especially if, You're going to get Fresno at plus 800, San Jose State at plus 750. Seems like great value to back the green and gold. But let's take one more quick break. Let's shout out a couple of our partners. Whether on the road, at home, or somewhere in between, First Bank makes banking easy, convenient, and secure. Their mobile banking app allows you to check balances, pay friends. You can manage your money anytime, anywhere. And here's the best part. If you open a new First Bank account, you can sign up and earn up to $300. They're all about helping you stay on track. Their tools make it simple to stay in control of your finances without the hassle. No matter where life takes you, First Bank gives you the freedom to bank how and when works best for you. So if you're ready for better banking and for a chance to earn a little extra, head to efirstbank.com/bonus. That's efirstbank.com/bonus to open your account, bank how you want, when you want with First Bank. Certain restrictions and requirements to apply. Member FDIC. I also want to talk about Coors Light, who encourages you to choose a chill mindset. Every time I see my friends now, they ask me if I'm choosing chill. It's become a great little recurring joke. So shout out Coors Light for that. But honestly, it's worth it because they're a great partner. And Coors Light is as Colorado as it gets. There's just something about, being in nature, by a river or something, cracking open a ice cold Coors Light, get that silver bullet vibe going, cold lagered, cold packaged, and cold filtered for that smooth finish. And of course, when the mountains turn blue, it's as cold as the Rockies. Coors Light is cold lagered. I just said that. Make the most out of the times you choose to chill. Choose Coors Light. Get Coors Light delivered straight to your door. Visit CoorsLight.com/DNVR. Celebrate responsibly. Coors Brewing Company, Golden, Colorado. Shout out to Ant-Man in the Toyota chat. Our guy Anthony Barr says Winfield, Ross, Maher, Lanier, Levon, Brown, top 5 wide receivers. Trying to think if there's anybody we might be missing in that conversation off the top of my head. Certainly, I would say those are the top 4. Levon probably has benefited the most of some of these departures. But based on what we saw in the spring, I mean, Lanier had an awesome spring. Tommy had a great spring. Jordan looks like the real deal. We're hoping, Winfield is healthy and is able to go. And obviously, whatever ends up happening down the line with Kojo Antwi and his Achilles situation, we'll have to see. It would surprise me if he's able to play, but I don't really know the full details of that injury and what the recovery process is going to be like. CD Sticks brings up PD Tucker, maybe Georgia State transfer, who's got some size and experience. He could definitely factor into the mix. I think there's going to be 2 or 3 guys that probably surprise us and serve bigger roles than we initially anticipate here. There's probably a couple of guys out of that top 4 that maybe don't quite live up to expectations as well. But out of the names we know and are familiar with, Armani Winfield, Jordan Ross, Tommy Maher, Tay Lanier, those should be the front runners for your top 4 most productive receivers. But I also think obviously the tight ends who we've talked about are going to really be a big, they're going to play a bigger role in the offense than we saw last year. I think there's some stuff out of the backfield that you can work in the mix as well. I think that Dupree and Lloyd Avant have really flashed some pass catching ability. And I think either of those guys could be impactful for you in the screen game. I don't think it's going to be a year you have 1,000-yard receiver. We talked about this with Kevin Lytle a couple weeks back. I think the passing offense as a whole is going to be more diverse. I think there's going to be a lot more contributors. I think the offense as a whole is just going to look a lot different. And I think it's going to be fun to see how all that shakes out and, how much of the air raid you lean on, how much on some of those West Coast elements you lean on, what type of shakeups do you throw in, with Taj at quarterback and then, the running elements. There's a lot of exciting things. I just think it's going to be a situation where you're really dependent on the group as a whole and less so on one individual, which I think is a good thing. You're not going to have the star power of a Torrey Horton, and obviously his ability to just take over a game was unreal. But I think it's going to benefit CSU that they're going to have 6, 7, 8 guys that are, potentially able to help wear teams down, essentially, death by 1,000 paper cuts, which is fine. I like that they've got really good skill positions. If you're skeptical of CSU, I mean, outside of saying the offense is what it is at this point, you could also bring up the fact that in 8 years as a head coach in the league, Jay Norvell's never made a Mountain West championship game. You could also point to the lack of general continuity on the defensive side of the ball. I think the pieces that they've added are exciting. I think that they're going to be more explosive, more athletic. I think they're going to get more sacks, and I think they're going to create more turnovers than they did a year ago. It's just a lot of new pieces having to come together, and especially with the way that the schedule works out and the need to have kind of a hot start, I could see a situation where there's some issues in, I don't know, like miscommunication early, and maybe you're just not quite as stout as guys are kind of trying to figure it out at game speed. Like you can go through camp and you can get those reps and scrimmage and all that, but there's just no substitute for what it's actually like in a live game scenario. How do they respond to that? I think Tyson Summers was a good hire, and I'm intrigued to see what he can do with the defense. It's just a lot of new pieces that you're trying to bring together, and I think there's valid concern about what that could mean, and what's only a 12-game season. Like that's the toughest part about college football, is you don't have much more than a week. Like maybe you can get away with one bad loss where things just didn't quite come together, but you start racking up 2 or 3 of those, and then all of a sudden you're in a really bad spot. And we've seen that with CSU the last couple of years. So we'll see. We'll just kind of have to see. But I think there's reason to have cautious optimism about the Rams going into this year, just given the talent and athleticism that they're going to have. I like that you have a staff that's very experienced within the league. No, they've never won the Mountain West, but there's a lot of weird things about being in the Mountain West. It's not easy to go to Laramie or deal with, Boise State and Air Force's wonky offense. Like there's a lot of pros that come with having a staff that's this experienced in the Mountain West. And obviously you want championship, but there's a lot of first year and second year coaches in the league right now, and that's where you're hoping that the experience of somebody like Norvell will be a strength for CSU. Keeping it rolling here, Air Force, you can get them at plus 1,800. They went 5-7 last year, but they did look a lot better at the end of the season than they did at the beginning. I think they won their last 4 games even. They're going to have Quentin Hayes back at quarterback, which is always a big boost for Air Force. If they do have some continuity, under center and in the backfield, they're always going to be a lot more dangerous. And they got Dylan Carson back at, their H-back, fullback, whatever, their top back as well. Air Force, I'm always going to give them the respect just because I think Troy Calhoun's an incredible coach. And I think the wonkiness of their system, even when you're experienced against it, it's always going to lead to some challenges. From CSU's standpoint, at least you get them at home. Would love to see the Rams win that game, obviously go out on a high note after really Air Force, dominated CSU for the better part of the last 2 decades, but you could go out with a couple of wins to end the Mountain West era. CSU fans would certainly take it. And, who knows when we'll see them again down the line. I'm sure CSU and Air Force will play again at some point, but I imagine there'll be some time, between those seasons. Hawaii at plus 2,000. That seems about right. I would say maybe Air Force is a little undervalued. Hawaii maybe a little bit overvalued, although they did have some success with their freshman quarterback late last year. So that could end up being huge for them. It was a bummer that they ultimately finished just shy of bowl eligibility last year, because I'm really rooting for them and Timmy Chang. But the silver lining of that was, with Braden Schrager, dealing with some injuries, they were able to find their quarterback of the future and get him some much needed experience, some really valuable reps. And I believe they did so without having to burn his eligibility, which is huge. Cynical, you could point out that might end up burning him down the line when he uses that year of eligibility elsewhere, which is just how the wind seems to blow these days for G5 schools. But I mean, you just got to do what you can if you're Hawaii and adjust on the fly. Anytime you can get a young quarterback some experience, going into next year, that's going to be huge. Wyoming at plus 4,000, coming off of a 3-9 year. Wyoming might be the biggest wild card in the league. I think they underperformed in year 1 under Jay Savell. I don't know what to expect with that offense. Losing Harrison Whaley to the portal was brutal, especially after they specifically maintained his eligibility last year because he had very publicly claimed that he'd be coming back to Laramie. Then boom, ends up hitting the portal. That's brutal. They're going to have a young quarterback. what does that offense look like? That's the big question for me. And then just defensively, you've lost a lot of experience these last couple years, especially in that front seven. I think they'll be competitive. I think Wyoming's always going to be a tough out. I do wonder if we've kind of seen that program peak, if, what they were under Craig Bull there, started with the success with Josh Allen and then, being right there in the mix for a couple of years. Did Wyoming maybe miss their window? And I guess we'll see. That proved to be the case with CSU and McElwain and early Bobo. It closes quickly, and that's the tough part. San Diego State plus 5,000. They bring over a couple of Power 4 transfers at quarterback. I don't know, man. I don't know what to think of San Diego State. I thought Sean Lewis was a good hire, and then they lose Danny O'Neal to the portal. He goes to Wisconsin. You bring over a freaky athlete in Jaden Denegal from Michigan, but couldn't really throw the ball. He's got a strong arm, but it kind of feels like a Jamarcus Russell Tebow situation. He throws a great deep ball, but he's mostly just back there to take direct snaps and run. Brought over Christian Washington, solid running back from Coastal Carolina. They're usually able to run the football, but they've got a tough schedule. They play Boise, CSU, San Jose State, and Wyoming. Not a brutal non-con Cal, Washington State, Northern Illinois, but Wyoming and San Diego State and maybe Utah State are probably the teams I would say I feel the least confident about in terms of my preseason assessment. They could be all over the place, and it wouldn't really shock me. Utah State at plus 8,000 in terms of value. I like that. I'd say they would be my sleeper pick. One, just because for whatever reason, they seem to typically just be right there in the mix, even when they lose guys to the portal. You bring over Mendenhall, who was a great hire. I think Bryson Barnes can be like a diet version of what Dampier was. He's not going to be Dampier, who was a stud, but I think he could have a similar success and lean on some of the things that they leaned on with Dampier's mobility, because that's what Barnes does best. I mean, we saw it in that game in Fort Collins. He isn't going to kill you, between the sticks. Arm strength is meh, but he's big, tough, strong guy, and he's a good athlete. He's going to be tough to bring down. At plus 8,000, maybe worth a sprinkle. I like that a hell of a lot better than I like Hawaii at plus 2,000 or Fresno State at plus 800. And to get that type of value, it's intriguing. New Mexico at plus 15,000 is maybe a little bit surprising. I know they lost basically everyone. You got to feel for them. As exciting as that season was, they had some real offensive talent. It just resulted with a 5-7 year. You still don't make a bowl, and then everybody leaves. Tough. I thought Eck was a great hire, and they've added some exciting players at the skill positions. It's kind of like an FCS all-star team at this point. The tough thing, I think, if you're New Mexico, is going to be in the trenches, and that's the most challenging thing of being a first-year staff and trying to lean on the portal so much. I mean, we experienced it a couple years ago in Fort Collins, but it's just really hard to rebuild your entire offensive line on the fly, and that's the spot that they're in. Nevada plus 15,000 coming off of a 3-10 year. We'll see, I guess. You got Purdy still, I believe, Chuba Purdy. I don't know what to think of Nevada going into next year. I just, they're in such a weird spot as a program. That's really all I can say about it. They're kind of in no man's land at the moment, and I just don't really have much reason to believe that things are going to get better anytime soon. I'd say CSU's undervalued, Utah State's undervalued, overvalued. I'd say UNLV and Fresno, and then if I was giving out a sleeper, like I said, I'd probably do Utah State just because I have so much respect for Mendenhall, and I do think that Bryson Barnes in his offensive system could be interesting. We'll see ultimately how deep they are, but they've got a shot. They've got a shot to be in the mix. We're going to give a Mountain West football uniform power ranking before we get out of here. If you've got any questions, comments, or away in the Toyota chat, we'll get to as many as we can before we get out of here. Let's take one last break. Shout out our final partners. Keep it rolling. Thursday, June 5th, is the 7th annual UC Health Healthy Swings Charity Home Run Derby. Broncos players like Cortland Sutton, Alex Singleton, and Marvin Mims will all be stepping up to the plate at Coors Field to raise money. I'd like to think I could still hit a home run. My younger years, I could. I don't know about Coors Field, but I could hit a home run in high school. I don't know if I could these days without pulling something, but hey, it's a great cause. It'll be fun to see what these guys are able to do. UC Health has donated over $900K to local charities over 6 iterations, supporting Coloradans with food insecurity, cancer screenings, veterans' mental health challenges. This year's beneficiary is something near and dear to my heart, Freedom Service Dogs. Freedom Service Dogs provide service dogs to individuals with limited mobility, young adults with autism, veterans, and first responders to help with disabilities like PTSD, traumatic brain injuries, and more. Just a really, really cool cause. Go to uchealth.org for more info. UC Health, live extraordinary. Trucks have always been a part of Toyota's DNA. For generations, Toyota's built durable legends destined for greatness and perfect for Colorado. Whether you're conquering off-road trails or hauling the weight of the world, there's a Toyota truck that's just right for you. Check out the Tacoma, the Land Cruiser's back. You can't go wrong with either of those. Toyota has 17 models with available all-wheel drive or four-wheel drive, like the Epic 4Runner. They also offer more low and zero-emission vehicles combined than any other automaker to give customers numerous choices to reduce their carbon footprint. Toyota SUVs take command on the road and on the trail, so you can explore the road less traveled without sacrificing smooth, steady rides. Toyota is a proud partner of CSU Athletics and the official vehicle of DNVR. Toyota, let's go places. All right. I figured we could just have some fun here at the end. There's not a lot happening on the local sports calendar. There's not a lot happening in terms of even sports news. Like, you got the NBA and NHL playoffs wrapping up. The Rockies continue to be a disaster. The Rapids are actually pretty fun. Check out the DNVR Rapids podcast if you're looking to learn a little bit more about that team. Got a big one tonight against Portland. Wrote about that a little bit in the newsletter this morning. But I figured we could do a Mountain West football uniform power ranking, have some fun with it, and then we'll call it a day. We'll start at the bottom. We'll work our way to the top. Again, I tried to factor in a helmet score as well as a jersey score, and then kind of the tiebreaker was uniqueness. You know, are you just wearing stock uniforms? What's your color situation? You know, how many teams are some form of, you know, like generic royal blue? You know, there's a lot out there. So I lean heavily on uniqueness. I lean heavily on having a very easily identifiable brand. You know, when I see your jersey, is there no doubt, no question about who it is? When I see that helmet, does it immediately signify something? You know, some of these teams' uniforms, they just lack identity. And then just like a general aesthetics. Is it a sharp looking uniform or is it boring? Starting at the bottom, and honestly, I don't think anybody in the Mountain West has awful uniforms. I do want to add that as a disclaimer. Like, I don't think there's any true train wrecks, you know, ones where you got to cover your eyes. Oh my God, it burns type deals. There's just some boring ones, and that's not surprising. Some of the other programs in the league, you know, they're not going to spend crazy money on this type of stuff. But we'll start at the bottom again, work our way up. I've got Fresno State at 12, and I should also add that this is just based on their standard uniform. It's not based on every uniform that they have. This is based on every team's standard home and road uniform. So not factoring in the alternates or anything like that. Shout out to Kale pulling up the visual for us. A smarter host would have already had these photos for you, but Kale's a lifesaver. Fresno, it's just, there's nothing to it, man. It's just red and blue. Like, the script is fine in Bulldogs. Their logo itself, meh. There's nothing wrong with them. They leave a lot to be desired, in my opinion. I'm not super into them. At number 11, I'd make a very similar argument, and that's Utah State. The blue and the white, it's sharp. Their logo, it's okay. But there's just not a whole lot to them. I do like the stripes on the sleeve. I think they're simple, and maybe in hindsight, I should have put them just over Nevada and San Jose State. But there's just not a whole lot to them. Like, they look sharp, but there's just not a whole lot going on. The blue and the white works, but again, like it's half the league, it's half the schools in the country. Their alternates are neat, but they're standard, just all blue, standard, all white. They're all right. I got Nevada at 10, and very similarly, I'd say there's nothing wrong with them. The silver and the blue gives it just a little bit more character than Utah State, and that's why I gave them the slight nod. I like their old logo better than their new one. I like that they've kind of leaned into a modernized version of the uniform they used to wear with Colin Kaepernick. I think that's a smart move on their part, lean into when the vibes were great. Their helmets are just slightly cooler than Utah State and Fresno State, and that's kind of what gave them the edge. Was I gave them the helmet nod there. Yeah, I don't know. They're fine. They're fine. They remind me of Columbine's uniforms a little bit, or maybe like a simpler Kansas State. Kansas State at least has the purple, which is a little bit more unique. Number 9, we're going San Jose State. San Jose State, they're honestly pretty boring. But for whatever reason, I've always thought they were kind of sharp looking. Like I think the yellow is in particularly really cool, and they wear that a lot. But it looks good in person. I like their logo. I feel like although there's not a ton going on, they have a little bit more character than Nevada, Utah State, and Fresno State. So I gave them the slight nod, although you could add that, blue and yellow are pretty meh. They're just, there's nothing super unique about them. But they look good. They look sharp, especially in person. At 8, we're going UNLV. They have good colors, the black and the red and the silver. It pops. But their helmets are boring. There's nothing particularly unique about their uniforms. And I just think that if they leaned into like the Rebel throwback logo, they'd have so much of a cooler visual identity. And that's where I'm at with UNLV. The bones are good. There's just a lot of room for improvement. At 7, like the UNLV, like they're fine. There's just not a whole lot going on with them. I think they could do a lot better. At 7, we're going Air Force. The helmet is great. This is one of those simple uniforms that I honestly like more than most people. They've got a ton of sweet alternates. Like every year they do a new one. But I love their helmet, just the white helmet with the blue lightning bolt. It's sharp. They're all blue. They're all white. They're all sharp. There's just not a lot to it. Like there's nothing on the sleeves. They don't have striping or anything going down with the pants. Like I think they could add a little bit more character to it. But overall, I would say Air Force is sharp. And I really like, basically from here on up, I really like everybody's uniform. Number 6, New Mexico, simple and sharp. Their alternates are some of the best in the game, but just the simple red and white, I think it looks good. I think their logo's cool. Maybe I'm giving them a little bit too much credit based on how harsh I was on the simplicity of some of the other uniforms. But it just works for me. Maybe it's the red and the silver. It stands out a little bit more than the blues, which all kind of blend together to me. But I've always had kind of a soft spot for New Mexico's colors and their uniforms. Here's where it gets really tough to me doing the top 5. And we've got some good commentary coming in here in the Toyota chat. But I put Wyoming at 5. I actually had them as high as 3 at one point. I think their helmet is elite. I think CSU, Wyoming, San Diego State, Hawaii all have really elite helmets. I think their colors are unique, which is cool. I don't think they're the best looking colors. Like it's tough for me to say I'd love to rock brown and gold, and it really looks like yellow more than gold. But I'll give them credit for the uniqueness of their uniforms, and I'll say that the white jerseys they have when they wear them with the white helmet and the brown pants, it's really sharp. I'll give credit where it's due. Maybe that's a little bit surprising that I have Wyoming as high as I do, but I just think their uniqueness, it earns them some points, and I think their logo's sick. Boise State coming in at 4, strong helmets, strong colors, orange and blue. I'm a Denver Broncos fan, so I love it. The uniform's not super unique, slightly more character than New Mexico or some of the other Nikes. They've got the striping, which I like. They've got a very strong visual brand, which is what gave them a slight nod over Wyoming, as well as blue and orange just being a little bit better to look at than the brown and yellow. I've got CSU at 3. I went back and forth. CSU, Hawaii, San Diego State. I think all have awesome helmets, and the helmets to me are the biggest thing. I think that CSU is simple, but they're sharp. I love that it's green and gold. There's just not a whole lot like that. I love the striping on the sides. It's very simple. We've seen a lot of schools kind of lean into these more traditional looks of late. The all blacks that Hawaii wears are just swaggy enough that I gave them the edge because there's just something about it. The all black uniform, the quarterback with the visor on, their helmet is great. They've got really cool uniforms. They've got a font that's very, distinguishable to them. And their helmet always just has kind of a unique flair. I did put San Diego State at the top. CD Sticks in the Toyota chat says, I hate Wyoming and San Diego State. Don't like the Aztec sleeves or helmets. Too busy. In fairness to Wyoming, I don't know how you make a good uniform with that color combo. All fair commentary. I think San Diego State's helmet is sick. I think it's one of the cooler, more unique looks in all of college football. I will say it might be overkill with the Aztec design on the sleeves. That might be doing a little bit too much, but it's unique. It's very easily identifiable, and I like that they lean into it. They don't wear, 50 different uniforms. When you put on a San Diego State game, you're watching San Diego State. But I have to disagree with CD Sticks respectfully on that one. I think that those helmets are awesome, and I wish that more teams would be willing to be bold and, take some chances and create their own kind of unique identity. That's where we're at, classic off-season content. I get it. Not a ton of meat on those bones, but it's June basically, and there's just not much happening until we start getting some recruiting news here. There will be a lot of guys on visits these next couple of weeks, so we'll kind of dive on that, get into some people you should keep an eye on. I'm going to wrap up here with just a couple of things I have on my summer to-do list. I've tweeted about it. I'm looking for recommendations during the slower time. I think the big one might be visiting Buc-ee's for the first time. I drive past it all the time on I-25. I took some heat for saying I'd never been. I have a hard time seeing it live up to the hype. It's just a gas station. I know that the food's really good and they've got clean bathrooms and stuff. Like, I bet it's a pleasant experience as far as gas station goes, but like, is it worth the hassle? Is it worth every time I drive past it, you just see like all these people in line? I don't know. Maybe I got to go at a slow time. What do we think, Kale? Is Buc-ee's?
Buc-ee's is cool. I mean, you're right. It's like a glorified truck stop, but like the gas is really cheap. Like, I get why people wait in line. The gas is like usually like 10 cents cheaper there than anywhere else.
All right. Well, then I mean, that's a strong selling point. I am nothing if not frugal, so I'll have to give Buc-ee's a shot. I want to try the brisket too. I know it's something that I've got to experience one of these days, especially because, we've no longer got Johnson's Corner anymore. Rest in peace. I want to hike to Horsetooth Falls. It's gorgeous, but it's an easy hike. It's not like as overwhelming as going to the top of Horsetooth Rock. I want to spend an afternoon at Breckenridge as well as Odell. Just a great way to spend a FOCO Saturday. I feel like that's about as on brand as it gets. I want to grab some root beer ice cream from Walrus. It's my favorite ice cream in the world. There's just nothing else like it out there, and Walrus has got that small town ice cream shop feel that just make the vibes perfect. It's like a hot summer day. You're with a friend, maybe you're with your loved ones, looking at the flowers in Old Town, eating some ice cream. It doesn't get any better than that. It's one of those little things that makes me love living up here. I want to visit JJ's Wood Fired Pizza. Haven't been in a couple years, over on the west side of town, and then maybe I'll head up the drive-in movie theater afterwards. There aren't a lot of drive-ins left in the state. I actually used to live right by it and never went, so I always kind of regretted that. But yeah, that's a couple of things I have on my NOCO summer to-do list. And the last thing I wanted to say here, and this has nothing to do with CSU, and I know we've been all over the place today, so just bear with me. I just wanted to say shout out to Demaryius Thomas. He's one of my all-time favorite athletes. I found out yesterday, obviously, that he's going to be inducted into the Broncos Ring of Fame. He was a guy throughout his career who I really argued was undervalued, and I still feel like he's underappreciated for how great he was. I know he had some drops here and there, but I just felt like people really fixated on the one drop that he'd have in a game instead of like the 5 or 6 phenomenal plays that he would make. He just felt like one of those types of guys that never got the credit he deserved, but the minute he made a mistake, everybody was there to jump all over him. Obviously part of some of the biggest moments in Broncos history, but in 2015, when the Broncos beat the Patriots on Sunday Night Football, I was fortunate enough to be sitting, by the Broncos bench with my dad after CJ Anderson scored the game-winning touchdown. A lot of the players, Osweiler, I think that was his first start potentially, or maybe not his first start, but a lot of those people were coming over and, they were high-fiving us and stuff. And I got these gloves from Demaryius Thomas, which are something that I'll always, really cherish, and just being able to experience that big win. And obviously it led to the Super Bowl run, and just to be in that moment with my dad and to get those gloves from my favorite player. It was one of those bucket list moments that I'll never forget. And I'm just really thankful to have been able to experience it with, somebody who I love and care about so much. My dad is such a big reason of where I am today, of why I do what I do, why I'm obsessed with sports. Did everything in his power, worked his absolute ass off, worked multiple jobs so that we could have really great lives and get to experience some really great things. And I'm just forever thankful for that. And I wanted to just kind of bring that up. Felt it was a nice way to end the show on a random off-season pod. Hopefully we'll have some CSU news to dive into on Friday. If not, maybe we can get a fun guest on here and we'll do something a little bit more unique. It is the off-season after all. Shout out to Kale, running things behind the scenes, making this work so smoothly. Couldn't do it without him. Shout out to all of you for rocking with us, supporting the content. Even in the dead of off season, we talk CSU Rams year round, because you know the drill. We're forever proud to be. Always peace, y'all. Much love.
We all silly like the mayor.